This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. We are recording this the day after one of the most historic and grim days in college football history. The Big Ten and Pac-12 have canceled their fall football seasons and will attempt to play in the spring. But three other Power 5 conferences are still moving toward playing a season: the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12. Plus, the American, the Sun Belt, and Conference USA are all still in on the fall. That's about 60% of FBS teams still attempting to play, and 40% hoping to make something of a spring season. To talk about all of this, my guest is ESPN's Rece Davis. He is the face and voice of College Game Day and one of the most thoughtful and knowledgeable people I know when it comes to college football. We'll talk about what has been lost, what still remains, and what we might be able to expect going forward, understanding that it would have been difficult to believe we'd end up where we are when we started this back in March. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you'd like to get your podcast. Please subscribe. And if so inclined, give us a good review. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans. And away we go. Joining me today is the great Rece Davis from ESPN, the face and voice of College Game Day. He looks like a Disney prince, by the way. Which is one of the few things that's getting me through the pandemic, Rece, is the Le Batard show. It's one of the few things I try to. Rece and I were talking before we started recording that one of the few that we try to find time in our crazy days these days to just have a little solace. And one of the things I've tried to find some time for when I can is that show. Even though they're very topical, I'm able to sort of get a few laughs and find some solace there. So anyway, one of my favorite things is the Looks Like game that they play, and your Looks Like a Disney Prince is one of the funnier ones. You've also voiced their tournament this year, so I know you're a good sport about that. Rece, long-winded way of me saying thank you very much for doing this today.
I'm happy to be here. This is the second biggest honor I've had this calendar year. The first, of course, being the voice of the Looks Like tournament that Le Batard and Stugotz came up with. So, no, I'm glad to be with you, Ralph. Always good to visit with you.
So it's the day after a historic and grim day in college sports. The Pac-12 and the Big Ten have canceled their fall football seasons. They hope to make it up in the spring because of concerns about COVID-19. The other Power 5 conferences are trying to plow forward, maybe not plow ahead, but cautiously step ahead. There's also a couple of G5 conferences that have pulled the plug on the fall, the Mountain West, and the MAC. So 40% of FBS is now hoping to possibly play a spring season. Just from a sort of an emotional standpoint, Rece, because we are tied to this sport emotionally, what were your emotions like when you saw and you as you digested no football in the Big Ten and Pac-12?
It's something, Ralph, that over the last few days that intellectually you knew was likely, but it was still far different when it actually happened, when it became reality, and you recognized no Floyd of Rosedale this year. No Ohio State, Michigan. I think I read something that the Buckeyes had played through the Spanish flu and world wars, and yet they weren't going to play this fall. So it was, it was something that was disappointing, and not in a sense of disappointed in the decision. I mean, people have to do what they think's best, but just disappointed that football won't be played in two areas with so much tradition and in so many places where it is such an important part of the culture and the fabric of those university communities. And just a sad, disappointing day. Even though intellectually you knew it was coming, emotionally it was still significant.
Yeah, I think for folks like us, and listen, you were born in Alabama, or you grew up in Alabama, so you have some connection to the South and to SEC football and Alabama football that I don't have in my background, having grown up in New York. So I've always sort of looked at college football in its entirety and appreciated it through its entirety and its differences and its quirkiness, the full sort of tapestry of college football. But nonetheless, you now look at it that way. And it is kind of interesting to, in these sort of divided times, and never more so than ever now that we see other conferences trying to move forward. I can understand if you're an SEC fan still thinking to yourself, well, Big Ten doesn't win any national championships anyway. But I think for a lot of college football fans and people who sort of are attached to the game in the way I believe that we are, there is this like embracing of everything that makes it so special.
You've seen more of that during the playoff era, and really even before that in the BCS era. Prior to that, I can remember sentiment, Ralph, and I was already working in television at the time, but when the SEC first started its its conference championship game, there were some fans in the conference, not just Alabama fans, but Auburn fans, LSU, whoever would say, at that time, we'd rather win that SEC championship game than the national championship, because the national championship at that time was largely a vote. I know they had, some alliances and stuff like that to try to create the game as best they could from year to year. But, that was sort of the forefather of the playoff system. So it was very regionalized. And at that time, you certainly paid attention to what Notre Dame or USC was doing, or fans did, I mean. But since really the start of the BCS, and going forward into the college football playoff era, there is great interest in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and what happens in Eugene, Oregon. Interest in Baton Rouge and what happens in Ann Arbor. And, that's been something that has helped the sport grow. And, you referenced how divided things are, and each conference acting independently. There is, it is my position that while perhaps for college football's future, that needs to be addressed and perhaps brought under one tent, and perhaps further paring down of the size of the highest division of college football. I would argue that, at least historically and in recent history, some of that independent nature has served college football well. It has allowed them perhaps to have a more lucrative situation than were everything negotiated through the NCAA. As the basketball tournament is, for instance. It has allowed them some more flexibility in how they wanted to pursue the college football playoff. Now, I think it's reasonable debate, and people can argue about whether the path taken to get there was appropriate, whether the actions that people are undertaking now are the right ones, and whether they should be more unified in a pandemic situation like this, the like of which people in our lifetime have never seen. Those are all reasonable critiques and arguments, but I do think that at least financially, and perhaps in some ways in the structure and interest of the sport, the regionalization of it and the conference pride and affiliation has really served it well in many ways.
That structure doesn't seem to be serving it well now, though, right, in a crisis. And again, this is a crisis like none of us have ever seen. But nonetheless, I think I can't remember the exact phrase, but in times of crisis, your weaknesses and strengths become more pronounced, right? Whatever your weakness is will be exposed, and whatever your strength is will be heightened to a certain degree. And I think the weaknesses are being exposed now. Let's just start from here. What do you make, and I'm not asking you to be an epidemiologist or a doctor here, but what do you make of the idea that, Bob Bowlesby said this today. He said, I think all the conferences are basically looking at a lot of the same data and information from their health advisors, from their health and safety and medical advisors, but maybe processing it a little differently. I guess I would say, why are we here? Why are only 2 conferences canceling and 3 other Power 5 conferences are not?
Well, first of all, I think not to try to just interpret what Bob said, but my take on that, the analogy that I draw is that in some ways I would liken it to if you have a medical issue and you get a diagnosis of that medical issue and you say, you know what, I want to get a second opinion or perhaps a third opinion. And perhaps one of those opinions, if not both, differ from the original diagnosis. I think you see that in some of the news that has been put forth about the myocarditis, that this myocarditis is not new. I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist, but this has been around for quite some time. The question becomes or in my judgment from what I've read, the question becomes this: how much more prevalent with this virus than with other viruses which have carried that risk, albeit rare, for decades? How much more of a risk if we can assess that definitively, and we probably haven't had enough time or data to do that definitively. And if it does pose a greater risk, how confident are we in being able to diagnose that in not only players, but in the general public? That's why I've been somewhat critical that, some of these conferences have acted like they've had these big secrets, about the medical information. They should share it with the public. I mean, because there are people who aren't football players who could benefit from it. But how confident are those medical teams that they can find warning signs, they can find symptoms, they can run tests, they can do cardiac tests that would let them know if any of their potentially infected players are suffering from this condition? And if so, it is my understanding from reading again that this is a treatable condition, which, you would miss the season. It seems almost definitive, but that goes without saying. Are they confident they can do that? How big is the risk? Those types of things. And I think that might be where I could see medical professionals and experts in their fields having a different perception of the similar data that Bob referenced.
You talked about sort of showing your hand. I want to talk about yesterday. The Pac-12 and Big Ten took different approaches in sort of making their announcements. And frankly, I don't think it served well the Big Ten nor a new commissioner in Kevin Warren to put him out there by himself and have him answer questions, whereas the Pac-12 didn't make it a televised show, and maybe was to their benefit as well. But even their media session was more of they had some of their own Pac-12 folks involved, Pac-12 network folks involved, but they opened up for questions. More importantly, though, Larry Scott, Ray Anderson, athletic director from Arizona State, University of Oregon president, and the head of their medical advisory panel were all involved in that Q&A. So they had 4 voices handling 4 different areas during that Q&A, whereas Kevin Warren was sort of a voice of one. And I understand sometimes you want one voice to show unity. I didn't think that served the Big Ten well. I thought the Pac-12 did a little better job of being transparent and explaining itself. What were your thoughts on how that played out? Because I think that influences, in many ways, your constituency and how they're going to react.
No, I agree with everything you said. I thought the exact same thing. While Kevin has stepped into an extraordinarily difficult situation, it was difficult enough.
Impossible.
Yeah,
frankly,
I mean, following Jim Delaney under the best of circumstances would have been a challenge. And now you throw in something that is unprecedented like this, and being faced with the types of decisions that he is faced with, or was and will continue to be faced with. And it is an impossible situation to come out of and say, yep, we did it exactly right, because, there's no definitive right answer for any of this. I mean, if we had a definitive right answer that would keep anyone from getting sick or the virus from spreading at all, then obviously we would be able to pursue that. That doesn't exist. So he's left with a situation where he's trying to do the best he can. The thing that did strike me about that is you mentioned the word unity, and that was not apparent from the Big Ten. And I thought, candidly, it was a pretty bad look, particularly from Nebraska. It was sort of the question to me, of where does free speech cross over into insubordination. You're still
Right,
free to
right.
say it. You're free to say it, but you're not free of the consequences, from it. And I'm perfectly okay with the disagreement. Absolutely okay with Nebraska or Iowa or, Ohio State to a lesser degree. And I thought Gene Smith actually stated his, preference better. And then I thought he came off much better perhaps than Nebraska did in this situation. So I think that they lacked some unity on it. And I also think the Pac-12 situation carried some unique challenges because of their geographic footprint and some of the local ordinances and restrictions and cases and things that they're dealing with in their area of the country that really other people aren't. So it's other regions of the country, I should say, aren't. So I thought all of those factors contributed. And, I agree with you totally that I thought the Pac-12, they served their constituents and served the fans in terms of acknowledging what was happening a little bit better. And I even had an athletic director, Ralph, from a totally different conference say that, for all of the criticism and some of it earned that Larry Scott has received recently, that he had actually been very steady and very displayed some really good leadership and cooperation during all of this time. Now, it was only one person, but I just thought it was worth noting. It was someone who had no tie to him whatsoever, but shared that with me a few days ago.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Again, because of the dynamics of what has played out with these conferences on the field and off over the last year or two, the Pac-12 has been a punching bag to a certain degree with Larry Scott right out front taking most of the blows, which again made it so notable that yesterday theirs went so much more smoothly, whereas the Big Ten, which is famous for its unity and collaboration and has made and has turned that into a massive fortune, quite frankly. I think a lot of the reason why the Big Ten is so profitable is because it has been a step in line type of conference, and the fact that was exposed a little yesterday. And again, this is a relationship business, aren't they all? I know that's a cliche, but to have sort of build the relationships and the trust that it takes to be a leader, which is what Kevin Warren's job is, to be in the job 6 months and be faced with just these monumental decisions and trying to herd the cats, which is to a certain degree what a commissioner's job is supposed to be. Again, it seems like such an impossible situation. So I have a lot of sympathy for him, and I don't necessarily think that this exposes him as not being the right person for the job. But I do think the Big Ten just got some bad luck on the idea that they have this new person stepping into this new role, and so much thunder is coming down upon them right now on college sports.
And I think from my admittedly limited interaction with Kevin, I was able to talk with him on a few occasions around the Rose Bowl this past year. Very impressed, obviously highly credentialed, understands the sport. I know he hasn't been in, this world, I guess, quote unquote, but, he has a son who plays. He understands. But I think your point about relationships is an excellent one, and I think it goes two ways. The other commissioners have had a period of time to get to know the nuances of each other, and now you have the others who don't know Kevin as well, at least from a business standpoint. And to be fair, nor does he know them. If I were in his shoes, I think I would probably be a little circumspect, be cautious and make sure that everybody was for sure working together. And I'm sure that, the others perhaps would view any new commissioner in that way, and the new commissioner would view them in that way if there, wasn't an extensive previous relationship. I think that's just human nature. And, I don't know how much that played into these meetings that they were having throughout the summer. And then I think that there were some in other conferences who felt a little blindsided might be too strong, but surprised at the timing of the Big Ten saying they were going conference only, which ultimately was a path that everyone chose to follow. But I think that, some of them were a little surprised by that. And, you make the point that the time has come, and I do want to clarify. I stand by what I say, that I think that the regionalization and the conference affiliation has served college football well in many aspects, not totally, but in many aspects. But I do believe that this situation and the nature of the sport and the advent of the playoff and where we're going from here and how, what the upper tier, what the highest division of college football should be and who should be included in that, the time has come to have a little more unified leadership, whatever that looks like, whether that is someone elected among the 5 power conferences, or do they include another one and make it 6? Do they include the American? I don't know. But whatever it is, some unity and singular direction, I think, at this moment in the history of the sport would serve it well.
Okay, I want to take a quick break, Rece. Rece Davis of ESPN joining me today on the AP Top 25 podcast, and we're going to get into where we go from here, and which is there's a lot of interesting questions about spring football and 2 national champions, maybe playoffs, and are they actually going to play in the SEC and ACC and Big 12? So we'll talk about that more with Rece Davis on the AP Top 25 College Football podcast right after this.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
And we're back on the AP Top 25 College Football podcast with Rece Davis from ESPN. So, Rece, gosh, there's so many different things that we could do here. But let's start with, this is an impossible one to answer, so I will not hold you to any of this. Do you think the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 are actually going to play? Well, let me just rephrase that. What do you think will stop them from playing?
Medical knowledge. Right. If they become uncomfortable with their ability to diagnose most of what I'm talking about here is the cardiac issue. Mm-hmm. If they are uncomfortable with their ability to detect and diagnose that would be one thing that would stop them from playing. Another thing that would stop them from playing would be a severe spike on various campuses once students are returned, and they are starting to return. Those 2 things would be the 2 things that lead to mind that would stop them from playing. Any type of medical concern. And you know what? There's a third to that. Something goes significantly wrong that shows it's untenable as they watch professional sports. All of it, as you know, Ralph, from talking to many of the same people that I have, they're watching the professional sports that are trying to play now, and they're particularly going to pay close attention to what happens in the NFL. If something goes sideways, those places spike in infections on campuses, some type of outbreak, or a discomfort from their continued evaluation of medical data that they don't feel that they can conduct it safely. I think those would be the things that potentially could stop them from playing. As we sit here today, over the past weekend, for the first time since this, I went less than 50% in terms of my optimism-pessimism scale. I'm venturing into the pessimism side. As we sit here today, I would give the slightest of nods, probably 51% that I think they're going to, barring any of the things I just mentioned, that they will give it a go at the end of September, or perhaps even delaying it one more week into the first weekend of October.
Yeah, I thought all along, and I thought the Big Ten and Pac-12 would stay with this, that they would all keep moving forward until there was a wall. In other words, they could deal with hurdles, but until there was like something that will really provide a hard stop, that they would keep moving forward, and that we would get to a season, and the season would be a little messy, and they would just keep playing until they couldn't play anymore. So I guess I still feel that way, even though 2 of the conferences have bailed out, because I think these 3 that are left have sort of stated that intention, that we're going to keep moving forward, and they are willing to sort of deal with certain level of disruption. They have stated that all along as well. And then it becomes, I guess, how disruptive how much disruption can you tolerate when you start playing? Again, this is barring worst case scenarios, but like at what point does it become, so this team we couldn't play this game, and now this team also can't play next week. It's one thing to do that with baseball, even a 60-game season, it's awkward. Mm-hmm. But boy, when you're only down to 10 college football games and you start eliminating one or two, or saying this team is going to be out of the mix for 2 weeks, I think that snowballs a lot faster in college football. At least I think it could.
There's no question it could. I do think that they have a chance. I mean, these players are largely in a quasi-bubble to begin with. Now, a lot of it will come down to behavior and following the recommendations that the schools that I'm familiar with, and I'm very familiar with the protocols at a couple of them and a couple of different conferences. If they follow those, I think they've got a good chance to maintain the very low number of cases that they've had in the last several weeks. The question becomes travel. The question becomes, are they going to do all of the academic classes? Most of the schools are offering some type of hybrid or online version. Are they going to ask that the guys take classes online and avoid that type of setting? That'll probably vary school to school. Those that do that would probably have an even better chance. But, there's nothing that's foolproof with this. There's a phrase you've probably seen out there that is really true. You can take all the precautions in the world, but viruses are going to virus sometimes. And so you're going to. I think that if they follow best practices, they have a chance to be able to play through a lot of that. But you're absolutely right. It won't take much in terms of someone going rogue, a couple of Cleveland Indian pitchers deciding they just have to go out on the town of Chicago, to wreck it for an entire college football team. There's no question that's a risk.
Let me talk about the players here for a second, because it's been a fascinating situation too in college sports, because you layer on the social unrest and the way the players have acted as far as that's concerned, and these united player movements asking for things related to COVID and health and safety. And also, out in the Pac-12, that movement talked about some other issues like economic rights and racial injustice, and all these things bubbling in college sports. And again, like the whole industry has just been shaken to its core. Specifically where we are now, with the players being so vocal about we want to play, right? The hashtag we want to play, and stars being involved in that. Do you feel like that has also, with the players and in a lot of cases, their parents stepping up and saying we want our sons to be able to play? Do you think that has provided a certain amount of cover? Now that sounds a little gross to say it that way, but do you think that has provided some cover for the leaders to move forward here? Because in lieu of a professional relationship where you literally have an agreement, a bargaining agreement, and we decide, okay, we will play and we will allow you to play and we will set up the conditions for you to play in a professional league, this is sort of taking the place of that. The players have said they want to play, so we are going to provide them the place to play. We are all in agreement here. Everybody is accepting the risk. I wonder what your thought is on that and how much the players have influenced what we're seeing with the conferences who have stayed in.
I don't think very much, because that goes away the instant that someone gets seriously ill or worse.
Good point.
They can't sign liability waivers that has rightly been taken away. No one needs to sign away their rights. And then it would become a case of, were the conferences who allowed them to play or the schools who allowed them to play, were they negligent? Where was the disease or the virus contracted? All of those types of things that could still expose them to liability situations. And not to mention just the optics of it. So while I think that it's reasonable to take the players' wishes into consideration, I think that can't just be the one factor that carries the day, because there are other things to think about. And, the basketball players wanted to play in the tournament too. Now, I know it's a little bit different because we've had some time, and that was so new, and it was, going crazy at the time. So So it's a little different, but the basketball players wanted to play. Baseball players wanted their season, and it was deemed not to be the appropriate move. So I think that their voices should be heard and taken into consideration, and if they have reasonable and valid points to make, those should be considered and perhaps enacted. But just because they want to play, I think it would not be responsible for the conferences to say, hey, well, they wanted to play. I don't know, they got sick. I'm sorry about that, but they wanted to. I don't think that would be the right way to approach it at all.
Talk about things that have been exposed throughout the pandemic in college sports. Part of one of the reasons why this has become so difficult is because of that dynamic between players and schools and teams, as opposed to the relationship between players and owners in a professional setting, where, again, you can sit down and you're getting paid, I'm getting paid. Everybody wants to make money here, so let's see how we can figure out a way to make money. And, I think it goes back to one of the reasons why the Big Ten and the Pac-12 canceled. I think there's a certain degree that I think college administrators wrestle with this idea of, like, what are we really doing here? I talked to people within the Big Ten, and they sort of had that sense of, like, wait a second, like, what is our mission here? This is a college. We're not here to provide, to run a minor league football. And I know it's very tough, and we definitely want them to have these opportunities. We feel like it enhances their education, but what are we really doing here? And I think that has gotten exposed, this idea that, to a certain degree, the thing that the NCAA and people in college sports have been fighting against for such a long time, this idea that, hey, listen, we all know this is a big business, and can't you just admit it? I think by not admitting it, it has made these decisions tougher.
Right, because if they really and truly believe that they aren't running a minor league system for football, particularly basketball to some degree, but particularly football, well, they're either having trouble getting a firm grasp on the truth, or they're lying to themselves, because that's what they're doing. No one has walked away from the money on this, and the players deserve to have restrictions lifted on them. I still wrestle a little bit myself with the idea of the college is actually employing the players. I don't wrestle for one because I don't think they're equipped to do it very well right now. Maybe they will be at some point, but I don't wrestle at all with the idea of all restrictions should be lifted on them. If they want to make money on Instagram, fine. Car dealer wants them to sign autographs, fine. You can, I've heard people say, oh, they'll leave practice early to go sign autographs. Well, the coach is getting paid pretty well to be able to enforce rules. So he should, that's an alarmist issue and a little bit of a red herring, a straw man to the argument, whatever the exact metaphor or terminology would be. The time has come to allow these guys and young women in some cases, depending on the sport and school, to capitalize at a time when they're the most profitable. And they realize now that they have a voice and that it will be heard and that they carry some weight and that this is, in fact, a business. It doesn't have to be exclusive from the university's mission. No one else complains, with a giant endowment or other ways that the university has generated revenue or whatever. This is a revenue generator, and it has come through the efforts and talents of the athletes largely, certainly the coaches too. The other thing is I see all this stuff, and I'm adamantly opposed to artificially restricting anyone's salary. The idea, well, we're going to cut Larry Scott to, $500,000 instead of $5 million. I'm opposed to that. But if you lift the restrictions on the players and you allow them to function in the marketplace, some of that might reset itself.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the money that gets sent to Dabo Swinney might wind up with Trevor Lawrence, instead. And so I think letting the market settle it is the proper way to go. But for an administrator to, act as, oh my goodness, I had no idea people were looking at this as a minor league, to me, that's disingenuous. It's been that way for a while. The money's big, and time has come for the players to be able to capitalize on that. And, while some of the proposals outlined, particularly in the Pac-12 player document, I thought they were asking for people to grant them things it was not within their purview to grant. Revenue sharing being the most normal thing. But the other one, the medical stuff should be a no-brainer. I referenced earlier the analogy of getting a second opinion. That's what that is. That does not mean that you think that the medical staff on your campus has some nefarious intention. It just means you want a second opinion. Or you want a different oversight, or another set of eyes on the problem. And I think that is completely reasonable and should be enacted if that's what the players want.
Okay, let me hit you on two more things because you've been very kind with your time today and, of course, always very insightful, Rece. So the first one is I would love to be able to be on the Zoom call where the commissioners start talking about a playoff when two Power 5 commissioners are not going to be part of the playoff if it's played in the fall. Because honestly, I haven't even done enough reporting yet to really have an idea of what this means to the playoff, but I just don't know how you do this. A thing that is essentially run by the FBS commissioners and really run by the 5 power conferences. If two of them are not involved, how do you do it? Let's just put it there. Your thoughts, Rece Davis.
I think if you're playing and you want to do the playoff, you should do it. Do it the same way you've been doing it. Would it be better with all 5? Of course it would be. Ohio State was a national championship contender. Perhaps another one would have emerged. Maybe Oregon, was going to be a national championship contender. But, I don't think that you just don't have the playoff because two of the conferences don't play or have decided not to play, and perhaps rightfully so. So in the event that the other 3 do play, I think they should take the top 4 teams and proceed. And, I know I will probably get accused of, your company has the contract. Of course you would say that. But, I just sort of, I look at it that way. I'll stay away from the snarky, Steve Spurrier answer that, just let the SEC and ACC champ play because that's the way it was going to be anyway. It's and now I don't mean to be snarky about it, but I don't see why taking that opportunity away from the teams, if they, in the event that they are able to play, serves any purpose. We functioned for many years in college football with the Big Ten and Pac-12 sort of doing their own thing in the postseason, and so this would sort of be a throwback without the benefit of having the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day between the champions of those two great leagues.
Yeah, the interesting thing is this year the Rose Bowl hosts a semifinals game, so it's not even like the Pac-12 and Big Ten sort of control the Rose Bowl this year. I don't know how this works yet, so I don't want to get out over my skis without having done some reporting, but this thing is going to be interesting and weird. I'm just going to tell you that if we do get there, there's going to be some interesting negotiations that go on. The last thing, Rece, is, and I know you had some strong thoughts on this, the Big Ten and Pac-12 are going to try to play some spring football. I'm not sure if that's going to be 4 to 6 games. I heard Ryan Day talking 8 games. 8 probably is about as good as you're going to get, maybe starting in January. And that would actually be trying to have almost like a legitimate season, because if the guys playing in the fall are only going to get 10 and, maybe they might lose one here or there, if you can get to 8, you've pretty much played a fairly legitimate football season in the spring, and then you're trying to turn around and play another one with a lot of the same players, not all, but a lot of the same players in the fall. I've heard from several people who are like, I don't know about that as far as health and safety is concerned. What do you think about the prospect of playing an actual football season, a noteworthy football season in the spring?
Following up with another one in the fall is irresponsible. This sport has gone to great lengths over the last several years to make it as safe as possible. And one of the things that they have done because of repetitive contact, this is particularly in concussions, but I have some thoughts about other aspects of player safety as well. They've limited contact in practice. I went back through the practice guidelines that were enacted in 2017 just this morning. And by definition, you're going to have several more contact practices. You increase your risk. I'm not saying I won't watch. I'm not saying I'm going to, stomp my foot and stick my bottom lip out and pout if they do it. I'm sure it'll be great football and we'll all enjoy watching it. But we have heard a constant drumbeat about player safety and ways to enhance that and to limit the contact that they have. In game collisions, I mean, anybody who's seen, I know injuries can have to happen in practice and you have collisions in practice, but very few teams, even not only just because of the rules, but very few teams tackle to the ground more than, a couple times a year because of risk of injury. So it's a controlled collision environment largely in practice. It is not in games. So you're going to go 8 games in the spring, and even if you delay the season, which, by the way, in the fall, which, by the way, carries giving up some valuable television real estate in the event that we're able to go, that's hard to see them doing. And then you're almost any way you slice it, you'd be talking about 20 games in, 10, 11 months. I think it's irresponsible. I don't know why people are embracing this, and I don't know why people are in our business are defending it. Especially a lot of the people are the first ones on the boat when they talk about safety. So, I've talked to some medical professionals and actually have some calls scheduled with other guys who are leaders in this forefront. If I am wrong, I will say so. I don't think I am. I think it's an irresponsible thing, and I think it's highly unlikely to happen.
That's a good place to end this here, Rece. Very passionate, and I think the one thing I'll add to that is I tweeted this out yesterday. I've always dreamed about there being a never-ending college football season, but it actually turned out to be a Twilight Zone-style nightmare that we might actually get it, right?
Yeah.
It's just to think that we have gotten to where we are is just unfathomable.
Yeah, it is crazy, and again. I've some people I'm scheduled to talk to over the next few days about it, and the ones I've talked to at this point go, no, you're right. You're right. Just your common sense suspicions. But I'm gonna talk to more people in the medical field, a couple in specifically in the head injury field. But the other thing, Ralph, is just for the good of the player and development, because whether it's strength and conditioning. I don't know that everybody understands how scientific strength and conditioning has gotten in recent years. And that takes some time. Whether and it's not just about gaining or losing weight or lifting more weight. It can be mobility issues. It can be particular things that you're doing to at least minimize risk of joint injuries, all kinds of things that take time. If you condense the year into 2 seasons, even taking away spring practice, which is largely a developmental, teaching type period, you've taken that away. You've turned a lot of the training time into recovery and season prep time. It just doesn't seem to be in the best interest of the player to me. I'm having a hard time envisioning. And even if you say, okay, well, we'll finish in March and then we won't start until the end of October, there's enough time. Well, then here comes old money back into it too, about all of that television real estate that you're conceding. And I'm not sure anybody wants to do that, particularly with the strains that they're going to have on their budgets as a result of what's happening right now. So I just don't see how it's a workable plan, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Rece Davis, the face and voice of College Game Day. Rece, man, thank you so much. Let's try to get through this. Hopefully, maybe we get a chance to see each other. Thanks for voting in the poll. That's a little up in the air still, just so you know. We actually have a Zoom call right after we're done taping here to talk more about that. But thank you for doing this today. You got great insight as always, Rece. Always appreciate your time and sharing it with me.
You bet, Ralph. Nice talking to you. Take care of yourself.
And now 3 and out, first down. Rece mentioned this in our discussion about spring football, but I have heard that the idea of messing with 2 seasons is not one that coaches and administrators are in love with. What I mean is, okay, you abandon fall for spring, and spring ends up being 8 games. Then because you had a spring season, now you need to cut the next fall of 2021 down to, let's say, 10 games. So now you've damaged both. Yes, there is a lot of fat in college football schedules, and if 12 games turn to 10 and the 2 games eliminated were non-conference glorified scrimmages. Fans might not care, and it would likely do no damage to determining national and conference championships. But again, as Rece alluded to, fewer games affects TV inventory, and these conferences and schools are going to need to be cashing in on full seasons as quickly as possible to make up for this year's losses. Second down, where is Nebraska going to go and cash $50 million plus checks for going 7-5? Conference affiliation is very much about relationships, and if the relationship between Nebraska and the rest of the Big Ten is irreparably harmed, I guess it could lead to a move at some point down the road. That said, unless Nebraska joins the SEC, it would take a massive revenue haircut by leaving the Big Ten. And forget about trying to explain why the SEC would want Nebraska. I have no idea. I'm also pretty sure a program that's having a hard time finding a winning formula in the Big Ten West wants no part of trying to figure it out in the SEC West. Third down, I really don't know if the Big Ten and Pac-12 made the right calls or if the other leagues are making the better call to keep moving towards playing a season. There are some compelling arguments on each side. What I'm not here for is somebody on Twitter insisting that they know for sure one way or another and that whatever you think is the right choice and the right choice is obvious. Listen, I live with an epidemiologist, and even she acknowledges a case can be made the players are practically, not totally, but practically bubbled, and they're being tested a lot. That's a good thing. Again, the most frustrating part of this to me is the schools are absolutely able to pull this off and would be able to pull off a college football season without so much angst if the pandemic wasn't still raging around many of the schools and across the country. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Warren Levinson, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Westwood One Podcast. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.